The Lewises were escaping their ordinary troubles, but found themselves trapped in a town where every night turns into a nightmare. They learned about the talismans that hold back the demons and the mysterious forces that control this place. But the horrors are just beginning. A blood-red dawn left them with one truth: no one leaves Sycamore Grove alive. Now, exhausted and terrified, they search for answers by day, before the next night claims them forever. The Lewis family spent the daylight hours recovering from the horrors of their first night in Sycamore Grove. Earl, ever the reluctant guide, insisted they stay inside, even during the day. The town's quieter in the sunlight, but it's never safe, he warned, loading his shotgun at the kitchen table. James stared out the window, his jaw tight. The small town looked almost peaceful in the daylight, with neat lawns and silent streets. But every shadow felt like it was watching, waiting. "We can't just hide forever," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Hide or die. That's the game," Earl replied without looking up. Clara sat on the couch with Lily, who drew pictures on a scrap of paper. Each sketch featured crude, spindly figures standing among tall trees. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Clara asked, her voice forcedly cheerful. "The people in the woods," Lily replied simply, not looking up. Clara froze. "What people?" "The ones who were watching us last night," Lily said, pressing the crayon harder against the paper. "They're sad." Before Clara could respond, Dylan appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of books he'd found in a dusty cabinet. "Most of these are old as dirt," he said, tossing them onto the table. "But this one's weird." He held up a journal bound in cracked leather. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and frantic handwriting. Earl's eyes narrowed as he saw it. "Where'd you get that?" "In the back of the cabinet," Dylan replied. "Why?" Earl snatched it from him, flipping through the pages with grim familiarity. "This belonged to someone who used to live here. He thought he'd found a way out." James straightened. "Did he?" Earl looked up, his expression dark. "He's dead." The journal occupied everyone's thoughts. Its cryptic notes described boundaries of safety and mentioned specific places in town, some marked with small drawings of talismans. James pored over it while Clara tried to keep the children distracted. Earl refused to say more about its former owner. "We need to check these places," James said finally, pointing to a sketched map in the journal. "If there's a way out, it might be there." Earl shook his head. "You're wasting your time. Those marks are just places he thought were special." "They're not." "But what if he missed something?" James pressed. "What if he was close?" Earl's eyes darkened. "You want to go digging through the Grove's secrets? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, Clara and Dylan walked to the edge of the garden to collect water from an old pump. The air felt heavier than before, the faint sound of creaking would carrying from the distant forest. "Do you hear that?" Dylan asked, his voice low. Clara paused, listening. The sound was faint but unmistakable, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on hollow wood. "It's just the wind," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. As they returned to the house, Dylan stopped suddenly. "Mom, look!" At the edge of the woods stood a figure, partially obscured by the trees. It didn't move, but its head tilted slightly as if watching them. Clara grabbed Dylan's arm, pulling him toward the door. When she looked back, the figure was gone. The family gathered in the living room, the tension thick in the air. Earl reinforced the talismans, muttering a chant under his breath as he hung fresh ones near the windows and doors. "They've been more active lately," he said grimly. "Something's stirring them up." "What does that mean?" Clara asked, holding Lily close. "It means you're running out of time to make this place livable," Earl replied. "The Grove doesn't like new faces. It'll keep pushing you until you break." James stood, his frustration boiling over. "Then we push back. There has to be a way to fight them." Earl didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the journal. "That's all you've got. The ramblings of a dead man." The first knock came just after sunset, soft and tentative. Lily flinched, burying her face in Clara's shoulder. Dylan grabbed the fire poker, his knuckles white. "Stay calm," Earl said, raising his shotgun. "It's just the beginning." The morning after their first night in Sycamore Grove felt unnatural, like the town itself had been holding its breath. Outside, the streets lay silent under a pale, cold sun. The Lewis family huddled in Earl's battered living room, exhaustion etched into their faces. The events of the night lingered like a thick fog, especially for Dylan, who couldn't shake the memory of the creature's glowing eyes. "Coffee," Earl grunted, breaking the silence. He handed James a chipped mug, the liquid inside as dark and bitter as the man himself. James accepted it, glancing at the talismans hanging around the room. Do these things ever fail? Earl sat heavily in a worn-out chair, his shotgun resting across his lap. They hold as long as you don't give the bastards a reason to come inside. But nothing's foolproof. Clara tucked a blanket around Lily, who was drawing quietly at the kitchen table. Her sketches, crude depictions of the creature she'd seen, made Clara's stomach twist. "She shouldn't be drawing those," she whispered to James. "It's how she's coping," James replied softly. "We're all trying to." Dylan stared out the window, gripping the journal they'd found. "Do we just sit here? Wait for them to come back?" "No," James said firmly. "We need answers." Earl gave a dry laugh. "You think you'll find something I haven't in 15 years? Be my guest. But the more you poke around, the angrier this town gets." "That chapel," James pressed. "You said it's where everything started. What's in there?" Earl's expression darkened. "Nothing you want to meet." Despite Earl's warnings, James insisted on visiting the colony house. He needed to know more about the town and its people. Earl stayed behind, muttering about fools who didn't know when to quit. The colony house was a surreal contrast to Earl's battered shack. It stood at the edge of town, surrounded by wildflowers and a crumbling stone wall. Brightly colored banners hung from the windows, and music drifted faintly from within. Yet, beneath its cheerful facade, there was something unsettling about the place. Dana greeted them with her usual sharp smile. "Back for more fun? You survived your first night, congrats. Most people don't. We're trying to understand this place," James said. "The chapel, the talismans, anything that can help us." Dana raised an eyebrow. "The chapel's trouble, but you're welcome to dig around if you want to end up like the others." "What others?" Clara asked. Dana shrugged. "The ones who thought they could outsmart the Grove. They don't last long. But hey, maybe you'll be different." As Dana gave them a tour, Clara noticed the strange dynamics among the residents. Some seemed almost happy, laughing and chatting like they weren't trapped in a nightmare. Others were quiet and withdrawn, their eyes darting nervously toward the windows. One resident caught Clara's attention, a young artist named May who painted vivid, unsettling scenes of the town. Clara admired her work until she noticed something chilling. The figures in May's paintings moved ever so slightly when she wasn't looking. "What's with these?" Clara asked. May shrugged. "The Grove speaks to me. I just paint what I see." Before Clara could respond, Dana appeared, clapping her hands. "Time for you to go. The night's coming, and Earl's probably sharpening his shotgun." Back at Earl's house, Dylan wandered outside, restless after hours of sitting around. The garden behind the house was overgrown but oddly vibrant, with flowers blooming in impossible shapes and colors. As Dylan explored, he found a small stone marker near the edge of the property. It was covered in carvings like those in the chapel. His fingers traced the symbols, and a chill ran down his spine. "Dylan!" Clara's voice snapped him out of his trance. She stormed over, grabbing his arm. "Don't wander off." "Sorry," Dylan mumbled, glancing back at the marker. But when he looked again, the carvings were gone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the house grew tense. Earl reinforced the talismans, muttering under his breath. "They'll be worse tonight," he said. "They always are." "What do you mean?" James asked. "The Grove doesn't like being disturbed. You poking around the colony, asking questions, it notices." The first knock came earlier this time, just after sunset. It was soft, almost polite, but it sent a jolt of fear through the family. Earl raised his shotgun, motioning for everyone to stay quiet. "Mom!" Lily whispered, clutching Clara's arm. "It sounds like Grandpa." Clara froze. The voice outside was faint, but unmistakable. "Clara, it's me. Please let me in." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's not him. It can't be." "It's not," Earl growled. Don't listen to it. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Clara, open the door. Lily began to cry, her small hands covering her ears. Clara held her tightly, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real." Then, as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The whispers returned, louder and closer than before. The talismans flickered, their light dimming. "They're pushing harder," Earl said. "They want in." The night dragged on, the tension mounting with every passing minute. At one point, the back door rattled violently, as if something was trying to tear it off its hinges. Earl fired a warning shot, the sound echoing through the house. Dylan couldn't take it anymore. "We can't just sit here," he shouted. "Quiet," Earl barked. "That's exactly what they want." James grabbed the journal, flipping through its pages. One entry caught his eye. "The grove feeds on fear. Hold the light, and it loses power." "We need to fight back," James said. He grabbed the lantern, lighting it and holding it high. The talismans flared in response, their light pushing back the shadows clawing at the windows. For a moment, the whispers stopped. But then, a voice came from the corner of the room, soft and mocking. "You can't hide forever." Everyone turned, but there was no one there. The first rays of sunlight broke through the windows, and the house fell silent. The whispers faded, the knocking stopped, and the talismans dimmed to their dormant state. The family slumped in relief, but Earl didn't relax. "They'll be back tonight," he said, "and they'll be worse." James stared out the window, his jaw tight. "We need to figure out the grove's weakness." Earl shook his head. "End it? No. But maybe, just maybe, you can outlast it." Clara held Lily close, tears streaming down her face. Dylan stood by the window, his fists clenched. "We're not giving up," he said quietly. The shadows in the forest lingered, waiting for the next night. The day after their second harrowing night in Sycamore Grove felt heavier than the last. The sunlight did little to dispel the unease that gripped the Lewis family. Earl had been quiet all morning, sharpening his shotgun at the kitchen table as if preparing for war. "Why do they keep coming back?" Dylan asked, breaking the silence. His voice was laced with frustration and fear. Earl didn't look up. "Because that's what they do. The Grove wants you afraid. The more scared you are, the stronger it gets." Clara, sitting beside Lily at the table, frowned. "So what's the alternative? Pretend we're not terrified every time the sun sets." Earl finally looked up. "You can pretend all you want, but until you stop letting it control you, you'll never stand a chance." James stood by the window, staring at the edge of the forest. The journal sat open on the counter, its pages filled with cryptic notes about the town. One passage caught his eye. "The woods hold answers, but they come at a price." "We need to go out there," James said suddenly. Earl scoffed. "Into the woods? You got a death wish." "We can't keep hiding every night," James replied. "If there's something out there that can help us, something the Grove doesn't want us to find, we need to take the risk." Clara looked at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and fear. "James, we barely survived last night, and we won't survive many more," he said. "If we don't start fighting back, we'll die here." After a tense silence, Earl sighed. "Fine, but if you're going into those woods, you'll need me, and you'd better pray we make it out before dark." The forest loomed like a living thing, its trees twisting unnaturally as if trying to trap anyone who entered. Earl led the way, his shotgun slung over his shoulder and a talisman hanging from his neck. James, Clara, and Dylan followed close behind, each carrying makeshift weapons and lanterns. "Stay close," Earl warned. "The Grove loves to separate people. If you lose sight of each other, you're as good as dead." The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change. It grew colder, heavier, and filled with faint whispers that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Lily's absence weighed on Clara's mind. They had left her with Dana at the colony house, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made a mistake. "Do you hear that?" Dylan whispered, his eyes darting between the trees. "It's just the Grove messing with you," Earl said. "Ignore it." But the whispers grew louder, forming fragmented words. "Why are you here? Leave while you can." Clara grabbed James's arm. "This place is wrong. We shouldn't be here." James looked at her, his expression grim. "We don't have a choice." Suddenly, Dylan stopped. "What's that?" He pointed to a clearing up ahead where something glinted in the sunlight. Earl raised his shotgun, motioning for everyone to stay back. He stepped into the clearing cautiously, his eyes scanning the ground. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small metallic box covered in the same carvings as the talismans. "What is it?" James asked. "Looks like some kind of container," Earl muttered. He knelt down, brushing away the dirt and debris. The carvings glowed faintly under his touch. Before anyone could react, the whispers around them grew louder, almost deafening. The trees seemed to close in, their branches creaking like old bones. "We need to move," Earl said, grabbing the box. "Now!" As they hurried back through the forest, the whispers turned into guttural growls. Shadows moved between the trees, keeping pace with them. Clara held Dylan's hand tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. "They're coming," she said. "They won't attack in daylight," Earl replied, though his tone lacked confidence. James glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of something, a tall, spindly figure with glowing eyes, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Earl, they're getting closer. Just keep moving," Earl barked. The group broke into a run, the lanterns swinging wildly in their hands. The shadows closed in, their whispers now forming coherent words. "You shouldn't have come. You'll never leave." They burst out of the woods just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Earl slammed the door behind them, bolting it with trembling hands. That was too close. James placed the box on the table, his hands shaking. "What is this thing?" Earl examined it closely. "I've seen these before. They're traps of a sort. For the grove." "Traps?" Clara asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "How can you trap something like this?" "Carefully," Earl said, and with a hell of a lot of risk. The box seemed to hum faintly as Earl opened it. Inside was a small, glowing crystal, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. James reached for it, but Earl stopped him. "Don't touch it. Not yet." "What is it?" James asked. "It's a fragment," Earl said, "of whatever power runs this place. The Grove hates these things." Dylan leaned closer. "Can it help us get out?" Earl hesitated. "Maybe, or it could get us killed faster." As the family debated what to do with the box, the first knock came at the door. Earl's head snapped up. "It's too early." The knocking grew louder, more frantic. The talismans flickered, their light dimming. Earl grabbed his shotgun. "They know we have it." The whispers returned, louder and more aggressive than ever. "Give it back. It's not yours." Clara clutched Dylan and James. "What do we do?" "We hold," Earl said. "No matter what." The night was worse than any before. The creatures outside didn't just knock. They slammed against the walls, rattling the windows and shaking the house. The talismans dimmed dangerously, their glow flickering with every impact. "They're trying to break through," Earl said, firing a shot through the front door. The creatures outside screamed, their voices merging into a single, guttural roar. James grabbed the lantern, holding it high. The journal said fire keeps them back. "We need more light." Clara scrambled to light candles while Dylan held the box, its glow growing brighter with every second. The creatures hissed, retreating slightly as the light intensified. But then the box began to pulse violently, its hum turning into a high-pitched whine. Earl's face went pale. "It's overloading. If it blows, then what?" James asked. Earl didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the box and hurled it out the window. The explosion was blinding, a burst of light that sent the creatures screaming into the night. The house shuddered, and then everything went still. As the sun rose, the family emerged from the battered house. The box was gone, its fragments scattered across the ground. Earl knelt down, picking up a shard of the crystal. "You bought yourself some time, but that's all it is, time." James looked at the forest, where the shadows lingered, waiting for nightfall. "There has to be a way to end this." Earl shook his head. "In it? No. But maybe, just maybe, you can outlast it." The family stood in silence, the weight of their situation sinking in. The Grove wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. The morning after the explosion of the box brought an uneasy quiet to Sycamore Grove. The town felt heavier, like the grove itself was nursing its wounds. The Lewis family and Earl sat around the kitchen table, their nerves frayed from the night before. "That box bought us time, but it pissed them off," Earl said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "They'll come back harder tonight." James stared out the window at the edge of the woods, his jaw clenched. What were they trying to protect? There has to be something out there. Clara frowned, folding her arms. Or maybe we just stirred the pot without knowing what we're doing. "We don't have the luxury of waiting," James replied. "If we don't figure this out, we're dead anyway." Dylan, seated at the far end of the table, flipped through the journal again. His eyes landed on a passage he hadn't noticed before, the words scrawled hastily. "Trust the living less than the shadows. They'll give you to the grove if it means their survival." "Dad," Dylan said cautiously, "what if it's not just them we have to worry about? What if the other people here?" The sound of a knock at the front door cut him off. Everyone froze. Earl rose slowly, shotgun in hand. It's too early for them. He opened the door a crack to find Dana standing there, her usual sharp smile replaced with a serious expression. "Mind if I come in?" Earl hesitated, then stepped aside. "What do you want?" Dana stepped into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the group. "We need to talk. Colony House is splitting." "Splitting?" Clara asked. "Why?" Dana sighed. "Not everyone agrees with how I run things. They think I'm too controlling, that I don't have their best interests at heart." She glanced at Earl. "Some of them want to handle things their own way. What does that have to do with us?" James asked. Dana looked at him sharply. "Because the grove feeds on division. And if we start turning on each other, we're all dead." Dana's warning lingered as the group followed her back to Colony House. The walk felt tense, with each rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making them flinch. When they arrived, the atmosphere was different. The once lively, colorful home now seemed subdued, its residents milling about in small, hushed groups. Richard, the cheerful man they'd met earlier, approached them with a nervous smile. "Welcome back. Bit of a mess here, huh? What's going on?" Clara asked. Richard hesitated, then leaned in closer. "May's been saying some strange things. She claims the grove is changing and that it's our fault." "Why would it be your fault?" Dylan asked. Richard shrugged. "Who knows? May's peculiar, but she's not the only one acting strange." James exchanged a look with Clara. "Where is May?" "She's in the studio," Richard replied, motioning toward a small building behind the house. "But I wouldn't bother her. She's been ranting all morning." Ignoring his advice, the family and Earl headed to the studio. Inside, they found May frantically painting on the walls, her hands covered in streaks of black and red paint. The images were disturbing, twisting forests, shadowy figures, and a group of people surrounded by darkness. "May," Clara said softly, "what are you doing?" May turned, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "They're coming. You've seen it, haven't you? The grove is angry." "What do you mean?" James asked, stepping closer. May pointed to one of her paintings, depicting a massive tree with glowing roots. "It's under there, the heart of the grove. That's why it won't let us go." "Under where?" Earl asked. "The old well," May whispered, "at the edge of town. But you'll never make it. They'll stop you." As the family left the studio, Dana met them outside, her face grim. "What did she say?" "She thinks there's something under the old well," James said. "Something that controls the grove." Dana sighed. "The well's a death trap. Anyone who's gone near it never came back." "Maybe they didn't know what to look for," James replied. "If May's right, this could be the key to getting out. Or it could be the key to pissing off the grove even more," Dana shot back. "You're gambling with everyone's lives." "We're already gambling every night," Clara said. "At least this way, we're trying to change something." Dana hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but if you're going out there, you're not going alone." The group set out in the late afternoon, knowing they had only a few hours before sunset. Earl, James, Clara, Dylan, and Richard carried lanterns and talismans, their weapons ready. Dana stayed behind, trying to keep the colony house from descending into chaos. The path to the well was overgrown, the air growing colder with every step. The whispers started almost immediately, faint and indistinct, like fragments of a conversation just out of reach. "What are they saying?" Dylan asked. "Nothing you want to hear," Earl replied. When they reached the well, it was smaller than James had imagined, a simple stone structure surrounded by tangled roots. But there was an unnatural energy in the air, a hum that seemed to resonate in their bones. "This is it," James said, stepping closer. "Careful," Earl warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with." James peered into the well, the darkness inside seeming to stretch endlessly. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, and a cold wind rushed past them. "They know we're here," Richard said, his voice trembling. As they prepared to lower a lantern into the well, the ground began to tremble. Shadows spilled out from the forest, coalescing into familiar shapes. The creatures were back, their glowing eyes fixed on the group. "Hold the line," Earl shouted, firing his shotgun. The creatures hissed, recoiling slightly, but not retreating. James held the lantern over the well, its light revealing strange carvings along the interior walls. "There's something down there," he yelled. "Then hurry up," Clara screamed, swinging a makeshift club at one of the creatures. Dylan, clutching a talisman, noticed something strange. The carvings on the well seemed to glow faintly, reacting to the lantern's light. "Dad, keep it steady," he said, pointing to the symbols. The creatures grew bolder, their movements faster and more erratic. Earl fired again, but his ammo was running low. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," he shouted. Suddenly, the lantern flickered, its light dimming. The creatures surged forward, and Richard screamed as one of them grabbed him, pulling him into the shadows. "Richard!" Clara cried, but it was too late. In a desperate move, James dropped the lantern into the well. The light flared brightly, illuminating the depths. For a brief moment, they saw it, a massive, pulsating root glowing with an unnatural light. The creatures screamed, their forms dissolving into smoke as the light from the well intensified. The tremors stopped, and the air grew still. "What was that?" Clara whispered, her voice shaking. "The heart of the grove," Earl said grimly. "But we didn't kill it. We just made it angrier." The group stumbled back toward the house, their nerves shattered. When they arrived, Dana was waiting for them, her expression a mix of relief and dread. "What happened out there?" she asked. James looked at her, his face pale. "We found it, but we're no closer to getting out." As the sun set, the whispers returned, louder and more menacing than ever. The grove wasn't done with them yet. The events at the well left the Lewis family shaken, their hope of escape now tangled in something far darker. Richard's disappearance haunted them, and the pulsating root they'd seen beneath the well seemed to thrum in their minds long after they returned to Earl's house. Earl slammed his shotgun onto the table, his face a mask of fury. "That was reckless. You've stirred the damn grove. Now we're all going to pay for it." James bristled, exhaustion giving way to frustration. "We had to do something. Sitting here every night waiting for them to pick us off isn't a plan." Earl leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "You think what you saw out there was bad? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Then tell us." Clara snapped, slamming her hands on the table. "We're trying to survive, Earl. If you know something, stop holding out on us." Earl hesitated, then sighed heavily. "The grove doesn't just trap people. It takes them. Little by little, it gets inside your head. Makes you doubt everyone and everything. When it's done with you, you're not you anymore." Dylan, clutching the talisman he'd carried since the night before, spoke up. "Like May." Earl nodded grimly. "Or worse." The tension wasn't confined to Earl's house. At Colony House, the residents were on edge, rumors of what happened at the well spreading like wildfire. Dana did her best to keep the group together, but splinters were forming. "Richard's gone because of them," one resident spat during a tense meeting, pointing toward James and Clara. "We should have never let them poke around." Richard knew the risks, Dana shot back, her tone icy. "We all do. But they're stirring things up," another voice said. "The grove's worse since they showed up. Maybe it wants them, not us." The idea hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Dana crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping over the room. We're not throwing anyone to the wolves. If that's your solution, you're no better than the Grove. But as the group dispersed, it was clear trust was eroding. Back at Earl's house, Lily sat by the window, her wide eyes fixed on the woods. She had barely spoken since the well, her usual curiosity replaced by a quiet unease. "Mom," she said finally, her voice soft. "They're watching." Clara knelt beside her, following her gaze. The forest was still, but Lily's words sent a chill through her. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "They're mad," Lily whispered. "They want us to go back." Clara's stomach turned. "Back where?" Lily turned to her, her eyes filled with tears. "To the well." Before Clara could respond, Earl entered the room, his face pale. "We got a problem." "What now?" James asked, his voice weary. "Dana just radioed," Earl said. "There's a group at Colony House planning to hand you over. They think it'll calm the Grove down." Clara froze. "What? They're going to—" "Not yet," Earl interrupted. "Dana's trying to stop them. But if it comes to a choice between you and them," he didn't finish the sentence. James stood, his jaw tight. "We're not running. If they come for us, we'll fight. And make it worse for everyone?" Clara asked. "James, we can't. We don't have a choice," he said. "We didn't ask for this. We're not their scapegoats." As night fell, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The talismans glowed faintly, their light flickering as if struggling to hold back the encroaching shadows. Lily whimpered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "They're here!" Earl stood by the door, shotgun at the ready. "They're always here." Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. Dana's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "They're coming. Get ready." James grabbed a lantern, lighting it with shaking hands. "What do we do?" Earl's expression hardened. "We make sure they regret it." Minutes later, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. At first, James thought they were demons, but as they drew closer, he recognized the faces. They were residents of Colony House, led by a man named Carter who had been vocal about blaming the Lewis family. "We don't want to hurt anyone," Carter called out, his tone cold. "But we're not dying because of you." Dana appeared behind him, her face furious. "This isn't the way, Carter." "It's the only way," he shot back. "The Grove wants them. We give them up, and maybe it leaves us alone." "Over my dead body," Earl growled, stepping onto the porch. "That can be arranged," Carter said, raising a makeshift weapon. Back at Earl's house, Lily sat by the window, her wide eyes fixed on the woods. She had barely spoken since the well, her usual curiosity replaced by a quiet unease. "Mom," she said finally, her voice soft. "They're watching." Clara knelt beside her, following her gaze. The forest was still, but Lily's words sent a chill through her. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "They're mad," Lily whispered. "They want us to go back." Clara's stomach turned. "Back where?" Lily turned to her, her eyes filled with tears. "To the well." Before Clara could respond, Earl entered the room, his face pale. "We got a problem." "What now?" James asked, his voice weary. "Dana just radioed," Earl said. "There's a group at Colony House planning to hand you over. They think it'll calm the Grove down." Clara froze. "What? They're going to—" "Not yet," Earl interrupted. "Dana's trying to stop them.